That hit me. Riot. Whoever made Jin's W, don't know what they were thinking. Clearly trolling. Does that spell even make sense? Smurfing is popular because the game is not fun at your skill level. It's fundamentally infuriating. There's a lot of reasons people smurf. Some people do enjoy, like, stomping on people, right? Back in the old days of gaming, the way you would stomp on people is you'd just get really good and there was no matchmaking, right? So if you were a really good player, you could just stomp on people whenever you wanted because there was no matchmaking. You'd be like in a pub lobby, right, and just destroy everybody. You know, skill-based matchmaking has changed a bit of that. It's harder to stomp on people. Now, the downside of that old way is that if you weren't very good at the game, you just get stomped on all the time instead of having, like, you know, a balanced match. But yeah, so one of the reasons people smurf is to, like, you know, stomp on noobs. That's a real thing that people do. It tends to be fun in a game like League of Legends or Overwatch or Valorant or whatever to, you know, go 20-0. It's generally a good time. There are other reasons that people smurf though too. Like as an example, it tends to be very hard in a game with skill-based matchmaking to play with friends of different skill levels. But yeah, like one reason a lot of people smurf that is actually a pretty challenging one to solve is how do you play with friends? Especially in like very, very tightly balanced games, it can be like very, very difficult to play with a friend, right? Especially if they're different skill levels. And so a lot of people, they'll smurf not because they're trying to stop noobs or anything like that, but they just want to have friends, want to play with said friends, and then, you know, don't want to be in a situation where they're ruining the game for said friends. Another reason people will smurf, and this one I think is complicated, but it's fairly legitimate. I think this one I'm about to mention is like very legitimate, is what if you want to play a different role, right? So like, as an example, I have a Smurf account that I don't really play on it much anymore, but I used to play a lot of top lane on my Smurf. And so I'm a support main, right? But I'm not, back in the day I was Diamond. Right now I'm struggling in Emerald, but we're going to talk about Diamond August. But so Diamond August, right? Like, I was only Diamond at support. I could only play support at a Diamond level. And so when I smurfed, I wouldn't play support. I would play top lane. And that was my, like, way to play top lane in a way that both A, I could enjoy, and B, to not ruin the game, right? Because if I was playing top lane in my Diamond lobbies, right, like, that would have been terrible. So it's kind of a thing where if you have a game with, like, different roles that people might want to get good at, that's one of the other, like, complications of smurfing is, like, how do you play alternate roles or things you aren't as good at in a like competitive environment. One of the things we tried in the past to like make it easier to like play alternate things was like role-based MMR, right? So it was like, hey, if you queue for jungle, this is your jungle MMR. If you queue for top, this is your top MMR, right? And that makes it so you don't really have to smurf because, you know, different roles are different MMRs. The challenge with that is that it's not very compatible with autofill, or any sort of system where you're not getting your main role literally every time. Because the second you have a system where it's possibly autofilled, or even possible to get your secondary role, what will happen is players will get into a game and be like, well, this game doesn't matter because I'm not ranking up my primary MMR. Instead, I'm ranking up my like secondary MMR, which I didn't want in this game, right? And so that creates its own like set of challenges.
One of the big things that's going to be challenging for game devs coming up in the next few years, especially if they're not making games for phones. P.S. For a lot of games, phones are the future, especially in the Eastern markets. Like, just it turns out most gamers out there nowadays aren't playing on computers. That's like a pretty awkward thing to have nowadays. They're playing less on computers and consoles, more on phones. But one of the challenges that a lot of up-and-coming, like for the next generation of gamers, if you're not making games explicitly for phone, is that a lot of gamers, like younger gamers, are iPad kids. They don't know how to use a mouse and keyboard. They don't even know how to use a controller at times, like a gamepad. they're used to manipulating a game with their fingers, like on an iPad, right? But yeah, that's a thing that game devs are going to have to be thinking pretty hard about in the upcoming years. Is like, what kind of control schemes are actually functional for somebody who grew up never using a mouse and keyboard, who grew up never touching a controller, and that's way, 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 way different. Like, one of the original advantages League of Legends had that is no longer an advantage and is now a detriment, but it used to be an advantage, is League of Legends uses RTS controls. Controls that if you grew up playing StarCraft and Warcraft and Command and Conquer and stuff like that, you'd be pretty familiar with. And before League came out, the RTS genre was a big deal. Many, many gamers grew up playing or understanding RTSs. Now the RTS genre is like effectively dead. Like very, very, very few people play RTSs. And so what used to be an advantage for League in that it had a very familiar control scheme that a lot of people would have been used to based on the games they played growing up, it now has a control scheme that's very foreign to the next generation of gamers. A lot of gamers will look at like League of Legends control scheme and like not really know how to play the game or what to do. Like, I've done labs where like I'll like watch legitimate new players play the game. I'm not talking about like someone who's like a giga gamer. I'm talking about an actual new player. And a lot of people who come into this chat, they're like, they think a new player is like someone who's like, they're just bad at the game. No, 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 dude. A real new player can't even move their character. Like, I'll watch new players who can't figure out how to move their character. And what I don't mean is they didn't try. It's not like, oh, they can't even push the right mouse button. No, it's like they'll push the right mouse button, their character will move, they'll be like, oh, okay, that moves my character, and then they'll fail to do it another time. And they'll fail to do it another time. And they'll keep trying and recognizing they're doing it wrong and try to fix it and, you know, use the right mouse button and then revert back to not doing it repeatedly. It's like, that's how foreign and weird it is to move around with the right mouse button in a game. And so like that's a thing. That's a thing that like is rough, is that, you know, if your game doesn't have a control scheme that people grew up on, it can be very, very hard for people to like actually be able to then get into and play your game. I remember back in college, you know, in 2010, I taught a friend of mine to play League of Legends. And she grew up playing MapleStory. She had not played any RTSs. She had not played League. I taught her how to play League. She works at Riot now, fun fact. But I taught her how to play League. And things that I would just take for granted, she wouldn't have a clue about. Like, I would like, when we were playing, I'd yell at her to like look at the minimap. I'd be like, you need to watch the minimap! And she'd be like, August, what's a minimap? Like, what is this concept? Like, because, you know, she had not grown up on RTSs like I had, like, with minimaps. And so, yes, it was right there, but, like, she just hadn't even learned to understand what it was and what you were supposed to do with it and what you were supposed to get out of it, right? And, like, that's the big deal. That's a big deal. That's important to think about.